Well, good morning. My name is Josh. I'm one of the elders here. We are going through the summer in the Psalm series still. We've sang a song, I think, each week. I think that's right. We've sang the song, A Mighty Fortress. And we're going to sing it again at the end, is my understanding. But I wanted to talk about the psalm that song is written from. So we're going to talk about Psalm 46. You can start turning there. We'll get there in just a minute. But I wanted to first just give a little bit of background on that song. Martin Luther wrote that song almost 500 years ago, which, I don't know, maybe, but not about you, but that seems like a long time to me. He wrote that song a long time ago. And if you know who Martin Luther is, this is a time in his life where things are not going well. He has nailed his 95 Theses to the door, and he has challenged the church and some of its issues, and he's getting blowback from that. He's being persecuted. He's had some friends that have passed away. There's a plague sweeping the city he's in. He's taking care of the sick and the poor. There's a lot of difficulty in his life. And at this moment, he is going back to Psalm 46 over and over again. He used to say to one of his friends, "Come, let's sing the 46th Psalm and let the devil do his worst." Like, his idea was that the devil's out there, the devil's trying to attack us, but I'm going to sing Psalm 46, and he can do whatever he wants. Because Psalm 46 points back to who God is, points back to why it matters to him. Let me just read a couple of lines. I'm not going to read the whole song, but I want to, just at the very beginning, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing." You're going to see this theme through the psalm we're going to read, that God is someone we can rely on. Just like you read Psalm 91 and Andrew at the beginning that said we can rely on him, that he's our rock. And through the song, he goes through all the things that could happen, all the ways the devil could ruin this plan, but he also goes through all the things that are good. Talks about the truth we have from God, that we have Jesus, who's this righteous man who's going to make it right. But at the end of the song, he says, "The Spirit and the gifts are ours, through him who with us sideth. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still, his kingdom is forever." There's sort of this triumphant end of the song to say, anything could happen to me. My body could be taken. It doesn't matter. God's kingdom is forever. So for God's kingdom to be forever, it's going to have to rely on a God that's forever, a God that's in control. So this became a rallying cry all through the Protestant Reformation. They would sing this song on the way to being martyred. They would sing this song when things were difficult, when things didn't go well. This is written on Martin Luther's tomb. A mighty fortress is our God. So my question for you this morning, as we read through Psalm 46 and talk about it, is this your rallying cry? When things are difficult, when things are hard, when things are not what you want them to be, how do you respond? There's a lot of ways we can respond. There's a lot of answers our world gives, but Psalm 46 here gives a very clear, not just how do we respond, but who's behind it? Who is with us through all of it? So let me read Psalm 46 before I go any further. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes war cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Let me pray before we continue. Dear God, I thank you that you let men and women cry out in song, that they write down these images of who you are to remind us, to bring us back to what matters, to bring us back to a place that's calm, that's peaceful because of who you are. I pray as we walk through this psalm and talk about it a little bit, that we would see the areas of our lives that don't line up, the areas of our lives that are troublesome, where we run to other things. I just pray that most of all, we would see you. We would see you as loving, see you as sovereign, see you as in control, so that we don't have to fear anything that's around us. And I just pray this in your name. Amen. So, we're reading Psalm 46 here, but what I want to say is the main theme I want you to get is that God's presence is our only source of peace. All through the psalm, there's going to be a lot of things that are talked about, a lot of issues that are going on in the psalmist's life, but the consistent theme is that God is there, that his presence changes the problem, that because God is there, he is present for the person in the situation, he is present there for us, that we can be calm, that we can have peace, that we can not just endure it, not just suffer through it, but that we can actually understand that God's in control. I'm not worried about what happens next, that I'm ready for what comes next. Because if my peace comes from something else, I'm in trouble, right? Like if my peace comes from my ability or my government's ability or my whatever, my job, my knowledge, my information, it's going to fail at some point. Some leader's going to fail me. I'm going to screw it up. Someone around me is going to mess it up. If my peace comes from any of those external circumstances, it's going to go wrong. If God's presence is the way to peace, and he said this repeatedly, I mean, the original lie in the Garden of Eden, the original lie that the devil said was essentially, God doesn't want you to be happy. God doesn't want you to have all this knowledge and information. He doesn't want you to be at peace. What God did in the garden was literally say, I want you to come to me. I want you to come to me all the time. So when they go and eat of the tree, they choose their own path. They choose something other than God for a source of peace. They think if they could know good and evil, they'd be like God and they could just figure it out. That's not what they needed. God knew that. It's why he barred them from that tree. It's why he punished them for that. Instead, he offered this tree of life, this tree of peace, this tree of what comes by trusting in God. We get that offer again later. We're going to talk about that later on. Do we still have the same dilemma? Do I want power? Do I want knowledge? Do I want glory for myself? Or do I want to rest in God? They're at odds all the time, even in my own heart, right? Just every day, every moment, there's that war going on, saying, I can handle this, I got it, or God's got it, and I'm going to do the obedient thing that was asked of me. It's still what he offers. It's what he offers all through the Bible. To the Israelites in Exodus 33, they're at Mount Sinai, and he says, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. This theme comes up over and over again. That's what he wants to offer. And we're going to walk through Psalm 46 and see a couple things. One, that God continually inserts himself into the situation, but he also points to what we should do in that situation. He points to what it should look like for us to respond to him. So we're going to go through this in three pieces. The first is this, as God gives us peace with his presence in our circumstances. He's going to give us peace because of his presence in different areas of our lives. The first one's just in our circumstances. The very first verse is, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Like there is a whole message just in that verse, but I'm going to try not to dwell there too long. When he says he's a refuge, we don't have that imagery anymore, right? In ancient cities, they had a wall to protect themselves. They would have some sort of tower. There's the imagery of you're running to the city for protection. You're running to this strong tower that's solid, that looks out at the enemy and is safe. That's what God's describing himself as a fortress, a refuge, a place to run. And it says also that he's strong. And I know this is clear that God's powerful, but I think it's important to notice when God says he is strong, he doesn't just mean he could destroy or do anything he wants. When we talk about God's power, it's always how it impacts us, how he's created the world, how he's loved us and created us. He has continued to do things that are for us. The gods of other nations, the gods of mythology, they're all a little too human, right? They're for themselves, they're for their own power. But our God isn't just strong, he does something good with it. We have this concept, that this word that scares people, but I'm going to use it anyway, is this idea of sovereignty. If God is sovereign, it just means he's in control. People misuse it, people misunderstand it, but all it means is this: he's not only powerful enough to do something, but he actually does it. He actually shows up. He steps into history and does something. And that might make you uncomfortable, but man, if he's not stepping into history, we're in trouble. We're in a lot of trouble if he's not going to step in and do it. So if he's powerful but didn't care about us, we'd be in trouble. If he cared about us but couldn't do anything about it, we'd be in trouble. But the fact that he has these two sides, a sort of control and this providential care that he loves us, he steps in and does things for us. It says it in the rest of the verse there, that he's a very present help in trouble. So how does that look? He shows up all through the Bible. That's why we have these accounts. Wes was talking about these sort of markers to say, how do we know God has done something? That's why we have a Bible, to point to these people in history where he's done things for them. But even in here, in this psalm, it's going to say, the Lord of hosts is with us. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. He's going to repeat these things over and over again. The way the New Testament says that is Emmanuel, right? God is with us. He's promised he's going to be with us. He is with us in the person of Jesus. If you don't know who Jesus is, this is important to the story, right? I can say God's with you, and you have a lot of images of what that means. Who God is, what does he look like? He has showed who he is through his son, to say he's willing to step into history and rescue us. He's willing to step in, come down to our level, suffer through the sin and the destruction that are here, and then save us. Save us by dying for us. Save us by rising again from the dead, conquering death, and saying he's going to come back for us. If that story is not true, then I'm not sure if God, it's hard to tell if God cares, right? Otherwise, he may just sit up in heaven and do nothing. That says he's with us. So by verse 2, he says, therefore we will not fear. He's then going to tell us a bunch of reasons maybe we should fear. But remember verse 1, God is our refuge and strength. We have no reason to fear. But in verses 2 and 3, there's a whole list of imagery there. There's mountains being thrown, there's oceans foaming, there's just chaos. In their world, that makes sense, right? What's the most stable thing you could think of? A mountain. I can't move a mountain. What's the most chaotic thing in their culture is the ocean. I mean, especially in ancient cultures, the ocean's chaos, it's evil, it stands for lots of ugly, dark things you can't control. You're not in control when you're at an ocean. I was on a trip recently. We were in the Pacific Northwest of our country, and there's so many mountains and trees and rivers and ocean there. There's a lot of beautiful sights. But a consistent thing you see down the coast of Washington and Oregon and Northern California are just massive rocks that seem to have just been thrown into the edge of the ocean. And I look at that rock. It doesn't really look like it belongs there to me, at least somebody from Central Ohio. I'm not afraid of it. Right? It'd be silly to be afraid of the rock that's been thrown into the ocean. I don't exactly know how it got there. People have ideas and guesses and stories, but I know that God put it there. I'm not afraid of it because he's in control. Otherwise, I'd be a little worried that somebody can throw a mountain into the ocean. I'm not concerned because I know who's in control. And in this imagery of these mountains and oceans, that's really not the point. The foaming ocean is not what he's really upset about. They're all imagery to say there's chaos in my life. There's something wrong in my job. There's something wrong in a relationship. There's something wrong with my health or a family member's health, that there's this war going on inside of me. The circumstances in my life are dark. So I can say that God's in control even when I feel like I'm not. And to make me stop and pause for this, he says this word. You may have wondered why I read it when I read through Psalm 46. There's 3 different times in here it says Selah. It just means to pause and reflect. It's essentially a musical term that means pause for the next verse. But it's not just a pause to say, hey, take a breath so you can sing the next line. It's also a pause. And what did I just say? Did you understand what you just sang? God's in control. Like you're worried about the mountains and the ocean raging, like God's in control. Pause and reflect on that. So this is what I want you to learn from this, is to pause and reflect. Like, has God left you without a refuge? No, he said he will be your refuge and strength. There are so many times throughout the Bible where God says, fear not. There's a couple hundred of them just from what I can find. And also dozens of times he says, I am with you. There are times he said, like in Isaiah 41, he says, fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. He is constantly reminding us of this fact. And if you're wondering why I'm going to say this so many times, I think this is key to all of life. If I think it's up to me, it's trouble. If I remember, I can remind myself in the middle of a situation that God's got it, I can survive it. I cannot just survive it, I can have peace. So the question is, what's the turmoil in your life right now? I don't know what it is for you, whether it was a job or a health thing or a family or a relationship, something going on in your life doesn't seem settled, doesn't seem right. It's a little bit out of your control, or a lot out of your control, and you're kind of worried about it. That's normal. That's why the psalmist talks about it. If we're being honest, we often have something going on in our life that has us a little out of whack. But I want you to do is each time we talk about one of these sets of problems is to pause and reflect and say, is God in control of that situation? Or is it out of God's control? Because if I can learn that God is in control, then I can just be obedient with whatever he's told me to do. I don't have to worry. I don't have to fear. So I want you to think about that. Pause and reflect. When you encounter an issue in your life, do you pause and say Selah? Say, okay, what's true? Not what do I feel, not what did somebody else tell me, not what are all the facts of the situation. Is God in control of this or not? And then he moves to the next verse. It says, God gives us peace with his presence in our city. The first was kind of, the circumstances of our lives are a mess. Verse 4, he says, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. I think that's fantastic after the last section, right? The last section, the ocean was a problem, the mountains were being thrown into the sea. But now there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God. The oceans were about chaos, but now the river is a source of life. The river is water. The river is for growing food, for cleaning things, for moving goods. There's all kinds of things a river does. If you look at most cities in our world, they are built on some kind of river, right? If they're not on a coast or in a port, if they're inland, lots of major cities, well, until recent years, we tried to figure out how to get around that. Most older cities are on some kind of river. Even Delaware is on the Olentangy River. There's a reason it's there. Do you think about the source for that city, that it needs water, that it needs goods moved, that it needs life? Even Jerusalem, it's not on a large river, but there's a spring there. It provides water. When Hezekiah's day, when he was king, he built this conduit so the water would be within the city walls. So when they're surrounded by an army, they have water. They can survive. When the Assyrians come and attack him in 2 Kings 18 and 19, he just sits and waits on God. God shows up like he always does. God shows up and destroys the Assyrian army, but he is within that city, safe. The other examples of that doesn't happen, right? You may not know this, but in Daniel tells the story this handwriting on the wall where he interprets the message for the king. And then suddenly an army invades. In history, that wasn't surprising that army invaded. The Persians had planned this. The Euphrates River runs right through Babylon, under the wall, supplying the city with water. The Persian army just diverted the whole Euphrates River. They set up a dam, they made the river go around the city, and they marched right under the wall into the city to invade. Like that river was a source of life as long as it was there. As soon as that river was taken, they had no ability to control it anymore. So what does that mean to you? You don't live in Babylon, you don't live in Jerusalem, you probably don't even live near the Olentangy River. You get water through a pipe, right? What does this mean to us then? The city of God has a river. I don't know if you know this, but we read Revelation 22. It says, the angel showed me the river of the water of life flowing from the throne of God. In the description of Revelation, which is really just a copy of Ezekiel, he describes this throne of God that's at the center of the city, and there's a river that flows from it. And from this river, not only do the people get a stream to drink from, but the plants grow, the trees grow. The trees then produce fruit that we can eat and leaves that heal the peoples. This city has a river at the center of it to show that the source of all good things is coming from where? It's not coming from the mountains. It's not coming from the rain. It's coming from God himself. God himself is at the center of the city. That God is the source of all these good things. If God is the source, he says it in verse 5. I was looking for which verse it is. God is in the midst of her. He's saying he's at the center. He's there. He's a strong refuge. He's the source of life. He's the source of the river. He's the source of the good things. But there's still chaos going on around the city, right? That description, Revelation, and Ezekiel is describing a future time in heaven where everything's perfect again. But in verse 6, the nations are raging. The kingdoms totter. That's where we actually live right now, right? I'm not going to try to list all the problems going on in our world because I would bore you or terrify you, one of the two. But there is something going on in your world that you're upset about, right? You can look at the news and see chaos that goes on in Ukraine or Israel or Iran or in our own borders. And depending on your news source and your view of the world, something about it bothers you. Something about it has you uneasy. Something about it doesn't feel right. Nations are in a rage. It's not healthy. It's not what it should be. Do you see that? Maybe you're just ignoring the news altogether and you don't see it at all, but if you've seen any of it, you see there's problems. If my faith is on one of those government systems to fix it, I'm worried. If my faith is on an economic system, I'm worried. My faith is on any of those leaders to fix it, I'm worried, right? Like if any of those people are going to fix it, I don't have a lot of hope. What does he say here? Who's actually in charge? The very end of the verse, he says, talking about God, he says he utters his voice and the earth melts. God's in charge of it. You're a little calmer, thinking God's in charge of it instead of me or some other politician. God's in charge of it. He says it in verse 7 then. You start to reflect on what is true. What do we pause at the end of this section and say? It says, Jacob, God of Jacob is our fortress. He sustained his people all through the Old Testament. He's reminding you of that. God of Jacob, God of Jacob. He says it again and again through here. Just like in Luther's song we're going to sing here, he sings about there's this man, this appointed man who's going to make it right. If he were not on our side, we would be in trouble. He says it's Jesus. If you read through the Sermon on the Mount, we did this last summer, read through the Sermon on the Mount, there's all kinds of things we're told to do, how we respond to the world. Like the world doesn't look like that'll work, right? The world doesn't look like just loving others is going to matter. But he tells us to do it anyway. Towards the end of Matthew 6, he essentially says, seek his kingdom because Jesus has got everything else. If you're worried about how it's going to go, The thing you need to hear, the thing you need reminded of, the pause and reflect, the Selah moment is that Jesus has got it. He's asked you to be a witness to the nations, to be salt and light, to love your enemy, to all these other things that are said there because he's in charge. I'm not worried because he's in charge. The question is, do you believe that? What world problem has you a little fearful? What situation do you think is going to spiral into something large? It shouldn't worry you. I know there are moments we get to step in and we get to be a part of truth and justice and all these other things, but there's no reason to fear. There's no reason to be worried because God is in charge. The question is, do you believe that? We get to the last section. God gives us peace with his presence in our soul. So we've talked about the circumstances in our lives, our health, our friends, our family, whatever. The bigger thing of the city. Does God have his arms around the city? How about in your own soul? Inside you, when you can't fall asleep at night, or when you're worried about what you've done, what you can't do, what is uneasy in your own spirit. He says in verse 8, he says, "Come, behold the works of the Lord." What he tells us to do is come and see what God is doing. The reminder is not, go look at yourself, go figure it out, go do a little better. The reminder is, what has God done? What has God already done? What has he done in the past? There's this declaration of things that are coming because God's got them. The fight gets a little more personal. He brings desolations on the earth. And then it says he makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the chariots with fire. So all that angst, all that worry about what was going to happen, what does he say he's going to do? He's going to end all of it, all of the evil, all of the corruption, all of the things that you went through your mind when I said, what are you worried about? He says he's going to end it. He's going to set it right. And this isn't just this place. This is all through the Bible. I mean, Micah 4:3 is one that I thought of. It says, he shall judge between many peoples. They shall, technology works great. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up against other nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. That they're not going to lift up their sword, that there will be the end of fighting. They will cease war, that it will end completely. That's not going to happen because I did it. It's not going to happen because the government caused it. If man could stop war and man could stop sin, we would have already done it at some point, right? We're not able. So what do I do? What do I do in the middle of this? Like, that hasn't happened yet, right? In case you're wondering, the wars haven't ended, the problems haven't stopped. What do I do in the middle? There's verse 10. It's probably the most famous verse in the whole psalm, right? Be still and know that I am God. That's a calming verse. That's a okay, I can take a breath. And every time I see this talked about or written, it's almost always like, my imagery, I know not everybody means this, but I picture people saying, we'll just go out in the woods, sit by a calm little stream and meditate and just be peaceful. That's not at all what's going on. That's great if you have the ability, the time to do that. But what he's saying is in the middle of the problem, in the middle of the war, pause, be still, know that God's got it. I don't always have time to see how it's going to end. I don't always have time to remove myself from the situation completely. But in the middle of the problem, in the middle of the war, I can be still. I can know that he's God. I love this psalm for a lot of reasons. I did not just pick this psalm because it's one of my wife's favorite psalms and she made me do it. She memorized this psalm years ago. This was a psalm that was important to us because we were in the middle of something that warred on us. We were in the middle of something that we had no control over. We could not fix, we could not solve, and no one else around us could. No other human could fix it. No matter what it was, no one had a real answer. I went to a baby shower for some friends yesterday, and I was reminded of that sort of war in my soul. What we wanted was to have children, and for whatever reason that wasn't happening. And now here I am, many years later, looking at them in the room, because we're all together here and thinking, God eventually answered the quest. He answered that question. Not in the ways I expected, but in two different miracles in two different ways that God had it under control. So I remember in the middle of that thinking, I should give up. I can't fix this. And that was the whole point. God wanted me at that place to say, you're right, you can't do this. I was in a place where I knew I was out of my depth. I was out of my ability. I was out of my understanding. But God was going to do whatever he wants. So when I talk about the word sovereign, I don't mean it in a, oh, we have no ability to do anything. I mean it in a, stop fighting with God. That's what the verse means. Stop your war with God. He's in control. He's going to do something good. He's going to do it for you. If you are a child of God, he's going to bring it around to something that's good for you. It's not always immediate. It's not always in the way you expect. It's not always in a way I would have planned, but he's going to answer it. There's a quote from Jonathan Edwards that I found when I was reading through this passage. It says, "The bare consideration that God is God may well be sufficient to still all objections and oppositions against the divine sovereign." What he's essentially saying is just pausing and saying, God's God. That should be enough for me to just stop, lay in the dirt, and say, you've got it. Because otherwise I'm going to be fighting God the whole time. The other situations, the nations raging, all the problems in my life are enough. I don't want to also be fighting God. So if I can pause and say, your will be done. What do you want from me? But this is the problem I want to solve, God. Okay, sure, I'll stop. This is what you asked of me. I will go do this thing while I'm waiting. There's a sort of parallel passage in Isaiah. I just want to read a little bit of it. Not the whole thing, in Isaiah 26, where he says so many of the same things that are said in the psalm. He says, we have a strong city. He sets up salvation as walls and bulwarks. Open the gates. The righteous nation that keeps faith may enter in. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for the Lord God is an everlasting rock. Is God your rock, or are you at war with him still? Because when you're at war with him, it's the worst situation to be in. All the other things that are going on in your life are small compared to being at war with God. And you're going to ask, why does God do that? Honestly, I don't know why he does some of the things he does, the way he does it. But the things he says there at the end, now I am no longer in my passage, as I turned. In Psalm 46, at the end there, he says, be still and know that I am God. But what does he say right after that? I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. If he's in control, he gets to have this little ego trip, right? He gets to say, you're right, that was hard. I did something in your life that you didn't think was comfortable. It's for a purpose. It's so you know me. I'm going to force you to be still. I'm going to force you to pause and reflect. I'm going to force you to know that I am God. I'm then going to be exalted. So then you can go back later and say, look what God did. Did I see the works of God, or was I fighting with him the whole time? Because if I'm honest, often in the middle, I'm still fighting with him. It's really easy later. You can ask me 10, 20 years later, you're going to praise God for what he did. Yeah, that's easy after he did it. In the middle, I have peace because of his presence. So as you reflect on that, what does he say? What is he doing? The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. There's this constant, he's with us. He's our fortress. There's this community of people that he's not going to abandon. So what's the trouble in your soul? What's the problem? The thing that's weighing on you? There are things in your mind, right? I don't want to speak for God. I want God to speak that for you. But as you pause and reflect, what do you need to be still about and stop fighting God over? He says he will never leave us or forsake us. So this issue, whatever it is, I understand it's difficult. I have seen things like that. but he's got a purpose for it. He's got a way he will exalt himself among the nations. He's got a way that he will make something good out of it in the end. So do you believe that God's in control? Go back to the main theme we said at the beginning. God's presence is our only source of peace. He doesn't promise the circumstances will be easy. He doesn't promise that your city will always be perfect. He doesn't promise that your soul will always be at ease because everything goes the way you want. He says, I'll be with you. I will walk through it with you. That he will be with us. And then in the end, you will look back and say, okay, I'm going to stop fighting God. I'm going to do what you asked. Even if it doesn't make sense, even if it doesn't seem to fix my problem. There's a woman you may have heard of, and her name is Corrie ten Boom, who went through these kind of fights, went through these kinds of issues. You read the psalm earlier, talked about the hiding place. Like there's these stories from the Nazi regime that took over Germany and most of Europe at one point in the 1930s and 40s. She writes this book telling her story of what happened and how she ends up and with her family taken away. I don't want to tell you the whole story because it's probably too late to tell you that whole story, but what happens to her is horrific. What happens to her looks like the nation's raging, looks like God's not in control. There's all kinds of moments where she could fight with God. There's all kinds of moments where she could say, I give up. But what does she say in the midst of these tragedies, these ugly things are going on in the world around her? Well, I'm trying to find it on my device. I should just put it on the screen. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. My future is unknown. At one point, her future was very unknown. She had, I would say, probably more difficult things in her life than anybody in this room has seen. Our problems feel personal. They are very important to us. She saw something very personal, very ugly in her life. Her whole future was unknown. She did not trust anybody or anything around her to fix it. But her idea was that God was known, that I could pause and know that God was real, that God is sovereign, that God gives me peace. If I think he's got my best interest in mind, if I know he's going to exalt himself in the end, then I can count on him to come through. I can count on him to do what he said he's going to do. So that's the question. Whatever your unknown circumstance is, whatever your unknown future is, can you trust in a known God to handle it? So for those of you who are believers, that's the question, right? It's a pause and reflect and say, okay, God's in control of this. This will be okay. If you're not a believer, I'm not sure what you're going to do next, right? Like that. This is the point where I should say, turn to God. I think I've said that 16 times, so I'm not going to say it the same way, but that's the question. What are you going to do on your own? If you're not a believer, you're going to suffer through and figure it out and not know. The whole message of the Bible is that man has messed up this world, but God is here to set it right. That he is with us, that he shows up all through the Bible. He shows up in the person of Jesus. He shows up in the person of the Holy Spirit in the church. That there are now Christians all around the world that know he is God. So if you have questions about that, you want to talk about that, please come to talk to somebody. Somebody you came with, somebody you see. Ask them, how has God made himself known to you? And if you're a believer and don't have an answer to that, I would encourage you to pause and reflect and say, how has God made himself known? Let me pray, and then we'll sing the last song. Dear God, I thank you that you don't make everything known. Because if I knew everything, I would really start to rely on my own ability, my own strength, my own knowledge, my own whatever chance to solve a problem. I thank you that you step into it with us, that you are the Lord of hosts, that you come into history for our good and for your glory. I pray that in the middle of that war that we would stop fighting. We would stop fighting with you, that we would cease the war and know that you're in control. That would give us comfort to know that you not only have the ability to change it, but you love us enough to change it, and you actually have. And that you will continue to fix those things. I pray that would give us a peace, give us a calm to say, whatever the situation, whatever the problem, this is what I need to learn in my soul, that you've got it. That my peace is not dependent on my circumstances or my city or what's even going on in my own spirit, my own soul. That my peace is based on your presence in my life. That you love me enough to step into it, to join in with me and set it right. I pray that we would see that end, see that heavenly city with this perfect river, the source of life, sustaining us, healing the nations, setting everything right. That it would be the end of all evil and war and all these oppressions and problems. I pray that in the meantime, we would pause and reflect and say, what has God asked of me? He has not asked of me to solve everything. He's asked of me to know him. I pray that we would know you, God, and we would then be obedient in how we respond. I just pray this in your name. Amen.